So my name is Kristen. I'm an extension educator based down in Saunders County and covering the southeast region for beef systems education. Larry Howard in the back would be your northeast region beef educator. So call either one of us if you have questions. But Darren kind of set us up really well. You know, what type of forages do we want to talk about throughout the year when we're building a system? So ultimately, what's our goal to get us through the year or to meet the needs at this time or to come up later in the year? Contact information, I didn't point out, it's right there on the bottom of that first slide if you'll need it. Okay, just a quick kind of review, but to give you a little bit more of the livestock perspective, what I would kind of target in terms of species. I kind of skipped the summer annual because I think that Darren did a good job with that. You're going with your either Sudan grass or your millet would be your choices. I think best choices for grazing livestock and getting both that potential yield as well as quality forage for your cattle. So if we skip down to that next planting, so where we'd be planting like either after wheat acres in July or August, to get that September through January grazing, we're looking at our cool season sensitive species. Your small grains, your oats, triticale, barley, like Darren had pointed out, oats probably the go-to that we stick in the mixes a lot of times. The turnips or your brassicas are a good addition to that oats, just because when we're looking at quality, that's going to boost it really well when we're talking about a growing calf diet. Preferably, I kind of go towards that rape seed, and I think Mary Janowski, our beef specialist, says the same, just based on that turnip. Some folks are a little concerned about calves grazing that and possibly choking on a turnip. It happens rarely, but if you're concerned, then the rape is still going to have that forage production above ground, but you're not going to have that bulb. It'll be more of a root going into the ground and having a fibrous root system. Daikon or radishes, some folks like to put that in the mix when we're talking about soil health or cover crop mixes. From the cattle grazing perspective, we had a 5-way mix of radishes, turnips, oats, sorghum, and sunflowers. The very last thing that they went to graze was the radishes. They're a little hot. If we bite into them, they bite into them. They kind of see the same thing. So they will graze it, but they're going to come back and graze that last. So if we're talking about grazing it in a strip grazed situation, they might not have that opportunity, and it might just be trampled. Cutoff date, that would be mid-September. Nebraska's getting them in by August. Picture on the right there would be an oat turnip mix that we planted in after corn harvest. And I think that this mixture was what Darren was talking about, our 50 to 60 oats, and then 3 to 4 pounds of turnips, which gave us a pretty good distribution as well as forage production. Okay, so then if we talk about that fall planting where we're going in after either corn harvest or soybean harvest, the options that we have are going to be a winter hardy. So again, we're looking at the spring, what we would be grazing for this year that we would have planted last year. So if we're thinking about what we could plant in our system this year, we're talking about fall planting in 2019 to graze in spring of 2020. Most common is going to be cereal rye. It's really hard to miss that one. I guess I've talked to a couple of producers that didn't get it until the 1st of December, and they still had a good rye crop the next year. Again, depends on your year, what type of moisture and such we had, but that one is a pretty hardy one. I would caution if you're going to put in any hairy vetch. I know you can get a little bit of a nitrogen boost from it, but if we're just putting in a strict crop of hairy vetch, we tend to see some toxicosis problems with cattle grazing it, as well as that's going to be a high protein, high energy crop. Okay, if we're talking about hairy vetch for brassicas, from the grazing perspective, I'm going to want to throw a grass in there because it's very high quality. I think Rick Rasby says it's kind of like putting alfalfa in water. We got a lot of moisture in that crop. It's high protein. Mary likes to say you're just feeding them basically corn, putting them out on a high energy diet. So putting a grass species in with that mix, kind of like Darren talked about, is important when we're talking about from the grazing side and getting that fiber component in there. All right, and then I know this is a little bit of a review, but I like pictures, so I brought the pictures. Darren did the talking. So we did a study down at the Eastern Nebraska Research and Extension Center there near Meade and Ithaca. Went in after either high moisture corn harvest or corn silage harvest to see what kind of forage growth we could get, and then what kind of calf gains. When we went in at the beginning of September, as you can see in 2016, corn silage harvest was done that day. Went in and seeded in an oat crop. On the other half of the field, it was in high moisture corn, so we harvested that on the 17th of September. And then went in directly after and planted in our oat crop. A 2-week difference, okay, in our planting. But if you look at that oat biomass production, 2 weeks of growing degree days makes a huge difference in terms of what type of forage production we're going to get. So if you want a little cover, you can still get that cover. But if we're talking about forage production and I've got calves to graze, I'm going to be wanting to shoot as early as I can to get that in, at least for my fall grazing purposes. So planting date, if you don't remember anything, and we're talking about fall grazing here, planting date, huge difference when we get that crop in as to how much production we have. So then when we take a look at feeding value, again, Darren stole most of my thunder today, so you guys just get a little repeat. The picture up here on the screen is brassica and oats mix. Okay, looks pretty dead looking, doesn't look like there's much there. This would have been planted September 8th. This picture was taken into December, January timeframe. Okay, it was standing about yay tall. By the end of this, or I guess in the December, January timeframe, it had melted down, I guess you could call it, to, you know, a little mat on the ground. We thought at first there probably wasn't much out there, so we actually pulled the calves. When we took forage samples, had them analyzed, we're looking at a pretty high quality diet then, so it maintains that quality throughout the winter. We were looking at about 20, 25, I guess, range in crude protein. So when we're talking about growing calves or we're talking about lactating cows, that's meeting their protein and energy requirements. Dry cows, we're hitting it and adding some condition, basically, with these annual crops.
You just can't leave them out on it after it freezes down, so keep grazing it down.
Yep, so his question is you could just leave them out after it freezes down, you could turn them back out. Yep, the biggest concern that we have in the winter grazing this stuff is if we get a foot of snow or we've got ice where they just can't get to it, that's the challenge grazing these. But as long as you've still got forage on the ground, the quality's there. Yeah, good question. So then when we look at what that was from the high moisture corn, silage corn data that we looked at just a little bit ago, we threw 4-weight calves out on that oats there in November, grazed it for about 40 to 60 days is what we had targeted from that planning. We got about 530 to 590, depending on which treatment it was, weights coming off. So about 2.5 pound gain on that earlier planted oats, and then about a little bit above 1 for that later planting date. Okay, so we've got, and the reason we think we saw that decline, I guess you could say, in average daily gain is just because once they went through and grazed what oats were out there on that high moisture corn, then they started eating the residue. So we've dropped that diet quality. So they still had feed out there. At that point, if they would have grazed oats off and were eating just the corn residue, we probably should have been supplementing them some distillers or something to keep that same diet quality. But on the corn silage side of it, planting those oats in, we can get anywhere from 2 to 2.5 is what we've been seeing with our oats and some sort of brassica. We've done some rape in the mix, we've done turnips, and we see pretty good calf gains. One thing that could hit us at this point would be if we got snow, okay, or ice. and we left the calves out there, we might see that it drags on the calves a little bit. So they might have been able to get to the forage, but again, how much energy was spent getting to it in order to meet their needs. We probably are going to see more like that pound a day average daily gain. For example, if we were on these oats and we got hit with some snow and ice and they had to dig for it. Okay, so we see really good calf gains if we're putting cows out there, dry cows. We're going to have plenty of protein and energy. Lactating cows, again, having some Nebraskas in that mix, you're going to meet that energy and protein requirement for those cows. And then Darren kind of mentioned this as well. So we could go with just straight monoculture of oats. It'd be easy. Just throw it in, plant it, 100 pounds an acre. We can see about a 2 pound a day gain. If I want to go the cheaper route, I could take out half that oat seeding rate, put in 3 pounds of rapeseed. It cheapens it up. I can't tell you how much off the top of my head. I'd have to go look. But we see a boost in our average daily gain and lower cost. So just working with those mixes a little bit, working with Darren, you can figure out where will be a cheaper buy, but also get you better gains off those calves as well. A few, I guess, things to keep in mind when we're grazing these annual forages. This isn't extensive, but probably the top 3 when we talk about either our summer annuals or those that are fall graze. Nitrate toxicity. So if we looked at an annual that was in drought, okay, we tend to see high nitrate levels. That would be a dry feed, okay, anything above, I think they say 2,000 parts per million nitrate nitrogen, okay, you start to see that it's not safe to feed to cows. When we're talking about annual forages, it's kind of a different bear. We're talking about something that has more moisture in it, so we can see a little bit more dilution of that feed to the animal. So in some of the samples that we pulled, we saw 3,000, 4,000 parts per million nitrate nitrogen. So in that case, it should have been a high toxic environment. But those calves were still eating it, and we pulled blood samples, and we didn't see any evidence of nitrate toxicity. So some of the things that go into that is they have a slower rate of intake, more moisture's in that diet. Okay, that diet type is different, as well as it's a higher quality. Sometimes when we've got high nitrate hays, a lot of times we'll say we'll put a little energy in the diet. That'll help to shift that microbe population, and you don't see that nitrate toxicity take place. But if we do, let's say we take our cows off pasture and we want to go set them on this Nebraska oats mix in the fall, maybe putting them out for a few hours the first day, giving them some hay there, or leaving them out on pasture, putting them out, just adapting them to that higher quality forage instead of just dumping them out might be a good way to adapt if you're concerned about nitrates. Prussic acid, Darren touched on that one a little. Biggest thing is don't allow them to graze until it's about 18 inches tall. Okay, we're concerned about that regrowth. Let's say we get a killing frost there in September and they're on some summer annuals, then waiting a week before you get out on that annual forage will help to decrease that prussic acid, and you won't have the issues with the calves. Grass tetany. So again, with annual forages, we're talking about a lush, immature grass. So just like in the springtime when we're dumping cows out on new grass, we're seeing that, I guess, that same effect or system when we're putting them out on annual forages. So lactating cows, that's probably our biggest area of concern when we're talking about class of livestock. Way that you can help with this, if they're on annual forages, make sure you feed them a free choice mineral with about 12 to 15% mag in there, magnesium. That'll help to offset the grass tetany challenges, and again, feed it at the rate that your bag or however says, so probably about 3 to 4 ounces per day per head would be your target. All right, and lastly, I just kind of went the overview, I guess, from the livestock side. When we're talking about going out on crop field, okay, we're talking about putting cows out on a place that probably doesn't have a permanent fence. Maybe they do. If it's great, you're set. Okay, if not, we're talking about, well, how are we going to get water to them, and how are we going to get fence, or what type of fence are we going to put up? So access to water, maybe you can hook up to the pump from the well. If you're going to be hauling water, and let's say you've rented those crop acres from someone, does that factor into your lease agreement? Just something to consider. Temporary fencing, whether we're going to put up just polywire strand, some T-posts, step-in T-posts, how often you're going to move the cattle. We would recommend being on these annuals. The best way to utilize them is to do strip grazing, because again, if they have full access, they're going to trample some of it. They're not going to eat that stuff that they've defecated on either. So we would advise maybe strip grazing like this picture shows, to use that most efficiently. A modification that Jason Grace, one of our guys at UNL, came up with is if you've got irrigated ground, you've got some pivots, you can modify and attach a rebar pole with your electric fence and basically just move the pivot. So it makes it easier than having to go out there and shift the electric fence yourself. So some cool ways that you can make it work, and then just make sure it's a hot fence. If you haven't had those cattle in electric fence before, or you've got calves that might be new to it, having it hot's the right thing to start with. Having shorts in it doesn't help, like with the tall grass, that's why they cut it here. But a hot fence will keep them in for sure. Now, I will say if you're right next to the highway or something, that might be a concern that you might want to be watching, because if they do get out, where are they going to go? So liability, I guess, just to think about. But all of this is outlined in one of our extension publications, Fence and Water Development, that you can catch on our website as well. So I guess just to wrap it all up, my points to think about would just be, what class of animal am I feeding this year? What do I need forage for? When do I need to get it planted? So based on what time of the year I need it, do I have the right species in place? And then do I have the infrastructure to make it work? So whether that be water or fencing, what do I need to get everything in place so that I've got that system throughout the year? And I have the same website as Darren had. I just have a little bit shorter link to it. Just do beef.unl.edu/cropland, and it can get you linked into a bunch of these resources. Or we have 3 handouts there in front of you guys that cover pretty much all the information that we talked about today, minus maybe some of the nutrition stuff. So with that,